All right, everybody, welcome to Dharma Live Online. Thanks for being with me this evening. Good to see you. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit more. Kind of last week I mentioned kind of getting from right action into right livelihood. I want to back into right action and back into livelihood again. I think these two kind of things need to be spoke about around the same time. Um, so the first thing I want to start with is if we think about right action, sama, kamanta, not so much as right action, but as really kind of doing our work, our dharma work. What is our liberation work look like? And for everybody, it's very different, and everybody has varying degrees of um, work that they're trying to do in the practice. And so I want to just talk about a way of looking at it that I actually got from the book written by Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson called Altered Traits. And that is looking at the path, the Dharma path, as a wide path and a deep path. And so the wide path, so in meditation culture, the wide path would indicate uh, that we want to make this accessible to as many people as possible. And some people are happy, well-adjusted people who live meaningful lives, and they meditate, they do mindfulness practice every day for 20 minutes, and it helps them, and they like it. And that's all they do. They're not really probably as interested in going as far down the rabbit hole as certainly I have gone and some of you have gone. And some of us just use meditation in our already practices of recovery, of therapy, and just our lives, and that's fine. I'm not that person. I do not fit in the happy, well-adjusted, life is easy person. I've had to add this to enhance that. That's not been my experience. And then the other side of the coin is the deep path, which is really looking at the Dharma tradition as a path of meditation, a path of ethics, a path of philosophy, and using it to kind of do our Dharma work. And so whatever that looks like for us. And so in many ways, it's, using the four tasks or the four truths as they're traditionally called. And really a lot of our work that I spend a great deal of my time doing every day is trying to embrace dukkha, trying to embrace life, trying to deal with the day-to-day setbacks that happen, the things that happen today that I didn't see coming, the things that I thought were going to happen today that didn't happen. All the ways in which I go through my day and I don't get the things that I want. The things that I don't want are happening. There's dukkha. And so I can resist that. I can fight with that. I can struggle with that, or I can take that on. I actually can take that on as my practice. My practice is to adapt to the moment to moment changing nature of my life as it unfolds. Sounds easy, right? Oh, wow. Oh wow, look at that. That thing totally didn't happen. I didn't, oh wow, I didn't get that job. Oh wow, isn't that interesting? Change is real, you know? And so that's a lot of work right there. And then, the work of trying to overcome and to abandon and to let go of the ways that we react around this. And what's our recovery time? There's a metrics they use in emotional intelligence, an emotional intelligence competency, which really speaks to this work around adaptability. Is you have a perceived setback, how long does it take you to recover? 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 years? I think there's some setbacks in my life that go back 10, 15 years I still haven't recovered from. Right? And these the ways that we do this, and trying to live a life that is nibbanic, a life that is cool-minded, a life that we have these inner resources. Because that's what Dharma really is to me. It's doing the work of developing inner resources to meet the external demands of life. And it's inner resources versus external demands in every single moment, isn't it? And sometimes we do good, and sometimes the external demands kick the living shit out of us. And I think that's part of it too. And then we can cultivate, a path, which I'm very reluctant to use this word path because, if you go for a walk in nature, if you go to your favorite spot and you walk down the path is all cleared out. You just follow it. The Dharma path is not really very well laid out. It's not like that at all. The word magga is the word we get for path, means something more like way, which is where we get middle way. It's a middle way that navigates between extremes. the extremes of poverty and capitalism, the extremes of gain and loss, lots of extremes. Have you noticed how our culture is very much dictated by extremes right now? The concept of a middle way is a fucking foreign, arcane idea in our culture that wouldn't even occur to people, you know. So we see that letting the mind wander into extremes. We can all give countless examples of how we see that right now as not being really the way to go. And there's no right side. You can't be on the right side of polarity. Let's just be clear about that. You know, there's no right side of extremes, which is why I don't like this word right for Sama. I think it's appropriate, it's adequate. And is the work that we're trying to do appropriate for our conditions? Is it adequate? Is it realistic? And I think this is one of the reasons why I've been really excited about teaching this course in particular, and really the work that I do now, is I think a lot of people come to Dharma practice with some really unrealistic expectations through no fault of our own. You know, you listen to a couple podcasts, you read a book or two on Buddhism, and you start to think, wow, ending suffering. I'm doing that. I'm totally going to do that. That sounds great. And then you realize that you can't. Um, and so a lot of times we're set up for this stuff. But part of it, having our work be appropriate and to be adequate, is, making sure that it's realistic and making sure that we have a kind of understanding for what are the limitations of our human experience, because we're very limited. We're limited in many ways by the demands of the body. I mean, I spend probably 10 hours a day just taking care of the body. I got to sleep for 7 or 8 hours. I got to shower. I got to eat. 30% of my day is just keeping the fucking vehicle on the road. You know, that's like a 30% of my day every day. It's trying to maintain this vehicle vessel. And I'm certainly limited by my psychological functioning, by my emotions for sure. So we have to be aware of the dukkha nature, that there's just certain things that we're in ways in which we're limited. And so we want to be realistic about that and clear about that and as specific as we can about how that is operating in our life. We also want to be optimistic about the possibilities. What's possible here? What can I possibly expect to perhaps get out of doing this kind of work? And then you have to do the hard work of assessing and paying attention and keeping track of that on your own. There's a book, I think it's downstairs. I was going to bring it up here and show it to you. I'll tell you about it though. It's a book, it's not that new. It's been out for a couple of years by a guy named Gregory Kramer. Gregory Kramer is a Dharma teacher in the Pacific Northwest, fabulous Dharma teacher, very much on the outer edge, not somebody that you probably have heard of, kind of been doing his own thing. He wrote a book called Insight Dialogue a couple of years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago now. That's really good. He wrote a book, the only book other than Bhikkhu Bodhi's little book. Bhikkhu Bodhi's little book on the Eightfold Path, great book, little tiny book. There's no Dharma teacher in America that I'm aware of, or anybody from the Western Buddhism, European, English-speaking person, has ever written a book on the Eightfold Path, which I think is fucking insane. Because if you were to sit down and talk to the Buddha and ask him, say, hey, I've heard you talk, I like your thing, I'm into this thing you got going on, what do I do? He would clearly and obviously tell you to cultivate the Eightfold Path, and nobody would argue that. And so why has nobody written a book on it? I find that to be that baffles me. Because 40 books a month come out on mindfulness. And most of them suck. Well, they're not that helpful. But he has a book called Whole Life Path. It's called A Whole Life Path. And I've been reading it. It's really good. In fact, I had a meeting with him a couple weeks ago. I got a chance to talk to him. He's great. So if you're kind of been following me along here and really want to get some practical, accurate perspectives on the Eightfold Path, I highly recommend that you grab that book. And it's certainly a deep path book. So our work, if we choose to take this on, and I would even say, like, even in this wide path, deep path, there's obviously something in the middle. You know, like which I really feel like I really am in the middle. I don't feel like I'm a deep practice practitioner. I am a busy guy. I have kids. I don't meditate for hours a day. I'm caught up in the world, and I've chose to be caught up in the world. I have no problem with the world. I actually kind of like the world, frankly, and I'm caught up in the world, and I'm of the world, and I'm in the world, and I'm happy to be doing that. And so I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle between the wide path and the deep path. And I think that middle path is really where we want to have a dynamic understanding that our practice wants to entail all these things we've been talking about. Our views and our perspectives on things is part of our practice. Our intentions and our motivations and why we do what we do, it needs to be part of our practice. What we say, the internal voice, the external voice is certainly part of our practice. And all of this is our work, this Dharma work. That's, as they say, samakamanta, not really right action, but really kind of a hard word to define. I like purpose. I think work is good. But, part of it could be the simple question is, why are you on this screen tonight? I'm sure you have 1,000 other things you could be doing than listen to me ramble on about early Buddhism. And so there's probably a lot of data there for you of like, well, I could tell you why. And so we need to kind of assess those things. And then we get into this livelihood business, which I don't think, again, livelihood is the right word. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I call 4 domains or 4 parameters of right livelihood, or really right survival, because it's not really so much about livelihood. And I think, and I'll beat the dead horse on this one, we really have to make a break between kamanta and ajiva, what's traditionally known as right action and right livelihood. Because when we think about our work, most of us think about my work as what I do for a job, what I do to make money. And that's not what that is. That's really about survival. So our work is trying to have this meaningful life, trying to have a life of purpose, trying to make sense of, really, I think a lot of this is existential. Have you ever not been able to sleep at night or wake up in the morning, or just been kind of sitting around going, why am I here? What's it all for? What's the point of all this anyway? It's just a big meaningless universe anyway, where people don't do what they're supposed to do and nobody behaves and nobody gives shit about anybody else. You ever get into this kind of thinking? Huh. Right. Very purposeless, meaningless. And, maybe that's true. I don't know. Like, we have to all come to terms with that in our own way. I highly have been influenced by the existential philosophy work, in particular Albert Camus, who really, where their perspective is very Buddhist, where they say that the universe or the world, that which is really out there, is totally incapable of providing you with meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose does not come and knock on your door. You got to find it, you got to develop it, you got to cultivate it. And I think that's a lot of the work that we try to do. And let me tell you, chances are no one's going to pay you to do that, unless you're lucky. There are a few fortunate few who are able to kind of figure out a way to, survive, make a living, make money by doing the things that they love. That's a very small segment of the population, let's be honest. And so then we have to deal with this very complicated situation of, we want to do our spiritual work or our Dharma work, our inner work, and we have to survive at the same time. I mean, I'm sure some of you, how many of you got to go up and work out for 8 hours tomorrow? I'm sure quite a few of you on the screen got to do that tomorrow, right? So we got to be careful that we don't think our job, or what we do for money, is somehow in the way of our Dharma work. And we can get really frustrated, and we get really irritated, and we can get really kind of caught up in that, because the Buddhist tradition doesn't really help us with that, because the Buddhist tradition is a monastic tradition. For them, they don't have to deal with any of this. They live in the monastery. They are supported by the institutions, which is great, actually. I'm, again, a huge fan of the monastic world, although we're not doing that. So we don't really get much here. So there's kind of 4 things when we deal with survival. So just dipping back into really survival, which is sama ajiva, traditionally known as right livelihood. I think it's just about how that we survive, and how we survive in our culture is we have a job and we make money. And if you want to get money, chances are you're going to maybe have to do something that's not that fun or that interesting. You might have noticed thus, right? And that's a dukkha thing, man. That's how it is, you know. So the four things I like to think about, I'll just say what they are, and then I'll kind of go through them. Is A, can we find survival work that's non-harming? Can we find work where we have a level of appropriate happiness? Can we find work that allows us to live in a way where we're debt free? And can we find work where we feel like we're of service in some kind of way? And these don't come from any Buddhist text. These are just ideas that I've cultivated over the years, and I thought I would share them with you, and we can discuss them at some point here this evening. So the first one is they're all wicked hard. They're all really hard. Trying to find work that doesn't cause harm. Now, that also means trying to find work that doesn't cause you harm. Because I know a lot of people, and I've been one of those people who have done non-harming work. I've worked in addiction treatment centers, people who work in hospitals, people who work in mental health, all the service industry people. They're not trying to, they're certainly not causing harm. They're trying to help people, but they're getting burned out left and right. They're harming themselves. So we have to be careful. We don't want to die on that hill, and we don't want to bear the cross of burning ourselves out and trying to serve others. So we try to find work as best we can that doesn't really add to too much harm. And I think really the analogy I would make is mostly this is a harm reduction. To try to find work and to try to make money in our society that causes zero harm is kind of impossible. Right? Let's just be clear about that. So we don't want to beat ourselves up if we work in a job, or we work. A lot of Buddhist friends I have work in industries where they start to question their ethics. So I'm working in this financial industry or this corporate industry or this environment that feels like it's causing a lot of harm. And so we all have to negotiate that. But I think we have to realize is we have to put ourselves at the forefront of the conversation of like, I'm not causing myself too much harm in this work survival situation. And that's a really dicey spot, because sometimes we hate our jobs, we're tired, we're bored, we don't like it. And we look at the culture, we're like, well, I don't have a whole lot of other options. And so can we just take that on? How do you take that on as a practice? And I think that leads right into the next one is, can we find an appropriate amount of happiness in our work, in our job? I just call it a job. I think that's what it is. It's a job. Can I find ways? Can I be clever? Can I be curious? Maybe I have a job that doesn't provide me a lot of meaning or a lot of purpose. Maybe it's a job that I just kind of don't like, but I do it because I need the money. And I've had fucking tons of those. I'm sure you have too. And I go to that and say, well, what's going on here that I can get some joy or some happiness? Maybe there's somebody I work with who I really like. Maybe I can connect with them in a different kind of way. Maybe there's something that goes on in a way that I can, because a lot of times when we have the job that we just don't like, doesn't provide a lot of meaning, we're just doing it for money, the suffering that we get from that particular kind of work is very, very much in the attitude that we bring to it. Like the job already kind of blows a little bit, and then we go in there with this really destructive attitude or this very destructive narrative. And we really, really bring a lot more of that to the table. This experience. We do this a lot in life, but I think we do it a lot here. And so part of it is like, and this is why I think it's so important to acknowledge that we have to do our Dharma work and our survival at the same time. Because a lot of times what we have to do is we have to bring something to the table of that. And then when we're not at work, we have to do things that are enjoyable, or we have to practice. We have to, again, very second noble task territory. We have to work on overcoming the destructive forces in our own mind. And it's not about the conditions that you find yourself in. The conditions are the conditions. So the question is, we can kind of collapse under the dukkha, and we can collapse underneath this kind of weight of being in a work situation that we don't like, or we can rise up to it and take it on. Say, hey, well, I don't like it. It doesn't provide me a lot of meaning, but it does provide me a place to live and food to eat. And so this is, a lot of people deal with this, especially right now. It's really hard times in our society. But I think, again, we have to recognize that these things need to be done simultaneously. The Eightfold Path isn't like you do one, it's not steps. You don't do one. You have to do all eight at the same time to really get some weight out of it, to really get it to deliver the goods. So watching out for that. The other thing I think, and this one's again, they just get harder, is trying to find work that allows us to live in a way that we're debt free. And so again, that puts us in the difficult position of how much do we need? It's so easy to, and I've been in debt so many times, it's so easy to get 10, 15, 20, 30K deep in a credit card. It does not take very long. I don't know if some of you have been there. It's easy. And so a lot of that is like trying to have some renunciation of like, okay, like I only make this much. And a lot of times, for a lot of us, I know this has been true for me in the last couple of years, it's like I basically make what I need. And I'm grateful that I make what I need, but like that's about it. Like I jokingly say, like every month, I mean, I slide into home plate. The last 2 or 3 days of the month, it's like, okay, let's not buy anything, other than half and half or coffee beans or something like that, And so that sometimes is how it is, And so because the burden of being in debt, if you've ever been there, is really, really difficult when you're not making a lot of money and you're like really, really in debt. And usually when we get into debt, it's not always the case. It's a lot of times for things that we probably could have gone without. Things we could have bypassed. We could have said, oh, I can let that go. So then again, it really puts us into this very personal question of what kind of a lifestyle is going to be appropriate for me and for the things that I want and for how I want to live. I could do a whole talk on this, but I'll try to just do it briefly. I went through this many years ago when I was in Los Angeles and was living in cities for a while and really just wanted and was really trying to figure out if I actually even wanted to Dharma teach and do the work that I do, because it's very difficult to make money. And because a lot of times I ask people for Dana, or I'm in a situation like you're all paying to be here. I made the choice of like, I need to live a lifestyle that's not that expensive. I can't be asking people for money and then be like squandering it. So that's why we live out where we live. We live in rural Colorado. We have land. We bought land. We have chickens, and where we don't live off the land, but I don't need to make a ridiculous amount of money to live every month because of where we live and the choices that we've made. And sometimes we have to do that. And so some of us want to live in the city. Part of it is like whatever your desire system is, it's okay. But a lot of it is you really want to think about all I'm saying as part of your Dharma practice. And most people don't think of it as a practice. They think of it as this irritating thing I have to deal with called the world. You know what I mean? You understand this position we get into so quickly? And so we're missing out on an opportunity to practice because we're not acknowledging it as practice. Livelihood, survival, work, action, these things this is moment to moment stuff. And the last one that I like to talk about is service. Is it possible for us to find work that we're being of service? No, it might just be as simple as fixing someone's car. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be epic. You know what I mean? Is the work that I'm doing, is it providing a service to somebody else? And you can feel good about that, even if you're a line cook at a restaurant, you're feeding somebody. It doesn't always have to be so epic. And that a lot of times we can find ourselves, and this can contribute to the appropriate happiness of like, I don't love what I do, but you know what? It's helping people. I'm providing a service for the world. My energy in this world is contributing to society in a meaningful way or a useful way. And I think that we can feel good about that. I think that we should feel good about that. And so when you start to think about whole path living, which I think is really, that's why I love this book by Gregory Kramer. I love this idea of whole path living, because that's what I'm certainly trying to do. And I haven't been able to articulate it in such a succinct kind of way. And so, and you all know this, I'm sure, but in the culture around Dharma, meditation, mindfulness in our society, it's very, very mindfulness centric. It's kind of a narcissistic thing of like, I just want to meditate so I feel better. It's all about me feeling better. And people get into meditation. There's nothing wrong with wanting to feel better. But I don't think it's about feeling better. It's about being better. It's about being well and living well and realizing that, you know, this path is an integrative journey where we have to be keeping an eye on all of these things. And I think the other thing about this that's so helpful is when you think about it along these lines, the practice really comes alive. It really comes alive. It's not Star Wars Dharma. It's not a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. There was this thing called the Dharma, and people were happy, and I ain't one of them. When we reduce, I think when the Dharma gets reduced to a meditation technique or a meditation exercise, I think it's been reduced to the point of almost being totally inadequate. Now, for some people, again, like I said, I do respect the wide path people, the people who are already doing well in these other 8 ways, and they're happy, well-adjusted people living good lives, and they do a little mindfulness to help contribute to that. I don't have a problem with that. But that's not really Dharma practice. That's just having a meditation practice, which is great. But I think for those of us who take this seriously, as I suspect many of you do, we want to really kind of think about this as a whole path life. And doing this kind of open scanning of kind of being aware, because some of you are probably excelling in some areas and not giving yourself credit. Like some of us really, let's just say, are really good with right speech. We found our voice. We communicate well with others. We have meaningful relationships where we can express ourselves, but we don't give ourselves credit for that. We don't factor that into the equation, and you should be. So I think a lot of us are thriving in ways that we haven't really been tracking. And I think that you really need to think about how you might be doing that, because you could be missing out on a lot of meaning and a lot of joy and a lot of purpose that you're already doing, but you're not really thinking about it that way. You're missing the picture, the whole picture, the whole path picture. So I'm going to stop there and we'll do some practice and then we can talk about this some more.